present here. I'm Toastmaster Joydeep Bhowmick, currently serving as the AD Director for S2 and the VP membership of my home club, that is Leaders Connect Toastmasters Club. A special mention to all the District 98 as well as international officers and guests who are present today. Thank you. People think merely of spending time. Great people think of using it. How often are you perplexed? Your goals are not met. It is often for the majority of the population. And the underscored reason is the incoherent plan we make, a plan without apposite thoughts. With that, I welcome you all for the episode 3 of Beyond Toastmasters initiative. Leveraging the current scenario with our meetings going virtual, District 98 has come up with this initiative to help members and guests to learn from the journey of veteran leaders and speakers across the globe. Beyond Toastmasters is divided into several episodes wherein proficient guest speakers deliver a talk on the learnings and experiences from the journey of public speaking and leaderships and how skills acquired in Toastmasters have helped them achieve success in professional as well as personal life. So here with our episode 3, we bring to you the art of tackling the quandaries with thinking more productively. Before we begin our fabulous journey today to become more productive, let me set a few ground rules to make it a hassle-free journey for each one of you. First, please keep your video off all throughout the session. Second, the chat option will be disabled to avoid distraction to the speaker. Third, for any questions addressed to the speaker, you can send the questions to the moderator in the private chat. Moving ahead, let me share the mission of Toastmasters International, which states, we empower individuals to become more effective communicators and leaders. Next is, we have mission of District 98, which states, we build new clubs and support all clubs in achieving excellence. Going ahead with our session, I will now introduce our moderator for today. He is an engineer by choice and currently working with Bharat Heavy Electricals Limited, Bhopal. He has been a Toastmaster for more than 3 years, served in various capacities from being a treasurer to the president of the club. He had won Toastmaster of the Year award. He had served as a CET Focal MP. He has been the first area director for Bhopal and currently the Division A director. He is none other than our dashing Toastmaster Aviral Patle. With a huge round of virtual applause, let me welcome moderator for today, Toastmaster Aviral Patle. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Toastmaster Joydeep, for that wonderful introduction. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, Toastmasters. Beyond Toastmasters, an initiative of District 98. And what can I say about it? Ever since I've joined Toastmasters, I have always been curious what our leaders, my area director, my division director, the international president, be it district director, what do these people do in their personal life? What do they do beyond Toastmasters? What motivation has moved them to grow so high in Toastmasters International? I've always asked everyone I've met in Toastmasters, every friend of mine, I've always asked them, what do you do apart from being a Toastmaster? And the answers have always fascinated me. They've kept inspiring me with their personal and professional successes that they've achieved. Ladies and gentlemen, we have one such speaker among us today. Kai Rambow is a professional speaker from Tampa, Florida. His subject area expertise includes productivity. In his career, Rambow has authored over 400 published articles. He frequently shares insights in his programs that he gained from interviewing top performers, including the Blue Angels and the Golden Knights. Rambow has delivered over 2,700 presentations to over 250 clients in North America, South America, the Caribbean, Europe, Asia, and Australia. An accredited speaker since 1998, Rambow graduated from York University with a bachelor's degree in communication. On top of being an accredited speaker, Rambow is a distinguished Toastmaster, the highest level of educational achievement in Toastmasters. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the accredited speaker for today's evening, Kai Rambow, DTM.
unmute. All right.
You are on mute, Kai.
I'm still on mute?
No. We can hear you.
Okay. So let me just check. All right, 2 questions. 1, can everybody hear me? And then 2, can everybody see my PowerPoint?
Yes, both is.
Good. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. It is a pleasure to be with you. As was mentioned, if you have any questions, send them to the moderator. We will have time for questions and answers. And hopefully I'll be able to get to all of those questions. If not, we'll, or at least hopefully we get through to some key ones. So when I was asked to do this, I was thinking about what I could share with you that would be helpful to you. And one of the things that came up is how I've used feedback. And so I'm going to focus on feedback to help you think more productively, not just think about feedback in your Toastmasters experience, but think about feedback in your life experience for other things that you want to do. I'm going to be using photography as we go throughout this presentation. I've done photography since my teenage years, and initially I used it to record my experiences while traveling. And I've been fortunate and privileged enough to have traveled to 60 countries around the world. Just this winter, I was in Cambodia, Singapore, and Indonesia. I have not made it to India yet, but you are on my list. And one of the things with photography, when I was in Australia, I got to hold a koala and got my picture taken with it. And I love animals, I love wildlife, I love photographing it as well. But in this case, I definitely wanted the picture of me holding the koala, which is a great experience. So I'll be using photography as we go throughout the presentation. And this one I just took this week. I was down in Key West, Florida, which is about as far south as you can go in the United States before being out of the country. And I took this picture with a spectacular sunset, gorgeous colors. And so I had an opportunity to capture this image. Well, let me take you back to early days in my Toastmasters experience. I was giving a speech at my club. I was working on an advanced manual, and this was the evaluation I received. Mark Jenkins was my evaluator that evening. We had joined about the same time. We knew each other outside of Toastmasters as well. And Mark stood up and said, "Tonight Kai was giving a presentation from Speaking to Inform, and I don't know why he did that. He already does that well. Kai, I'm going to challenge you in front of all of our club members to give a speech with emotional content or with humor in it. I've never heard you give a speech that was emotional in the content. I've never heard you give a speech that had humor in the content." Well, that was a pretty tough evaluation to receive. But at the same time, I looked at it and said, I'm getting feedback. Most of the feedback we receive in Toastmasters is well-intentioned, is valuable. And he's absolutely right. I've never done that. I didn't think I was ready to give a speech with emotional content in it, so I thought I'd work in the humor. Well, as most of you know, when you give a speech, they announce your objectives. So my next speech, they announced that one of my objectives was to be funny. Well, my evaluator that evening got up, and if I thought Mark was tough, the evaluator that evening was even rougher than Mark, because my evaluator stood up and said, one of Kai's objectives tonight was to be humorous, and as we already know, he was not funny. Ouch. That hurt, but it was actually accurate. I tried again, and I had similar results. It got to the point where I stopped announcing that one of my goals was to be humorous because I was not doing it. I tried 7 times. On the 7th speech, they finally laughed once, but they did not laugh where I expected them to, and I had no idea why they thought I was funny at that point. So that was my start. When we get feedback, we have 2 choices. We can reject it or we can accept it. The challenge is if we reject it, things stay the same. Now, I understand all the reasons for us rejecting it because that involves our ego, it involves our feelings, and we just don't want to deal with it. So that's the easy choice. The tougher choice is to accept it, or in this case, as I accepted Mark's challenge, and think of it as an opportunity to grow. So I took that information, I took that feedback, I tried to practice it and to really incorporate it. And as you can already tell, it was a real struggle to do that. So it took the 7 speeches just to get even a crack one thing that people found funny. And I kept on working on it. Many years later, I won the humor speech contest at the district level. So I won it at the highest level that I could possibly win it. And as a professional speaker and trainer, having a sense of humor and being able to communicate it is important. So it's important in my work. Didn't know it at the time, but certainly it was a great skill to learn. Now, the funny part is sometimes people have talked to me about the International Speech Contest, and I have practically no desire to enter the International Speech Contest. And part of that is because I'm pretty good at giving speeches and presentations. The challenge would be to come up with something that would be winning, and that would be what I'd go after. But to win the humorous speech contest at the highest level of possible, that was a great achievement for me. So one of the things I would encourage each of you to do is to pursue things that you genuinely know are important for you to go after. And that's what you should focus on. Don't do it because somebody else says, oh, you should be in this contest or you should do this, and you don't really know why you're going to do it. Now, there are advantages to entering contests, and I'll talk more about that a little bit later. But that was one of the significant experiences early on in my Toastmaster experience. And so when you talk to me about speech contests, the other speech contest that I had great difficulty with, I know a lot of you can identify with this, table topics. I really struggled with table topics, and I also won table topics at the district level. So those 2 contests I've won at the highest levels possible. Those 2 were the most important to me. The other contests, they're just as important, but not that significant to me personally. Well, how do you become more advanced with your feedback? One of the things I'm going to encourage all of you to do is to keep really good notes and work on incorporating feedback into your next speech. Do not be afraid if somebody makes a comment to you or submits feedback to you and you're not clear on what they meant. Follow up with an email, follow up with a phone call, and find out, hey, I got this note. I'm not sure I understand what you mean by this. Could you tell me more about it? And sometimes that slightly extended conversation of just a few minutes can really give you some good insight into what you're doing well and what could be done a little bit differently or even a little bit better. Certainly in the early days, and I kept it all in my manuals, I had all the feedback in there so that I could check on it and see how I was doing and progressing. So I encourage all of you to do that. Have some really good notes. Another thing that a lot of Toastmasters seem to be really reticent to do is to take feedback and redo your speech. Try it again. See if you can't make it better. This is not as easy as it sounds. Now, in those days when I was working through the basic manual, number 7 speech was to incorporate everything you'd learned until that point. And I gave the speech, and the feedback I received basically said, you did an okay job with it. And I was not happy with it. So I decided I was going to redo it. And I redid it, and the feedback I got was, it's really an improvement, still not quite there. And so I did it yet a third time. And the third time I did it at another club to get the feedback. And then I felt comfortable enough moving on to the next one. Now, that was my personal choice. I'm glad I did it. And I would encourage all of you to think about a speech that didn't go so well to consider redoing it. Here's what I would encourage each of you to do as well. Immediately after each speech that you give, write down the best thing you did and the number 1 area that you think of improvement. Then compare that with the feedback that you receive. What I want you to do is become good at evaluating yourself, so that 80% of the time you're in the same area as your evaluator. So that's what I would encourage each of you to do. Now, I just did this recently with my photography. As I mentioned to you, I was down in Key West, which is an interesting destination here in Florida. And I came across this on my first trip there 2 years ago. And I really like this. I love Art Deco. I happened to come across this theater. They also had this nostalgic Marilyn Monroe statue in front. And I really wanted to capture a good image of it. And I thought perhaps I could enter this into a speech competition. So what I did was I took this picture, I had it up, and then I was looking at it. Now, most of you probably did not notice this, but there are 2 things that are in here that are distracting. And so there's some bikes and some other stuff in there, which if I were to enter it into competition would get me dinged. So I need to have as clean an image as possible. I was trying to do some things in Photoshop, but was not able to do them successfully. So I just kind of left it. Well, this time on my trip, I came across it. The first night it was raining and I thought, I can't go out there and do that. So on another night, I went back, and it was unbelievable to me, probably because of the virus, but there were no bikes, nothing attached to the front. I had a very clean shot. And so I took a moment to take the image and capture it. So sometimes when you're take an opportunity to redo it or retry it, you can get better results. That is not always the case, but try to do your best. So I use the same principle in photography. I had an image I really liked, but it wasn't quite where I wanted it to be. So I took some time when I had the opportunity to redo it. So I talked about taking an opportunity for you to think about your presentation and become much better at identifying the main things. Now, you may be saying, I may think of more than one thing. That's great. But what I would like you to do is start with one. So if you can sit down after your presentation, think about, identify one thing in each of those areas, and you become good at doing that, then you may think of some other things so that you're thinking about what you're doing and how can I do this better. So a lot of people, when they're looking for their own productivity in whatever it is they're doing, they are reliant on other people for feedback. And certainly that can be helpful, but I want each of you to start thinking about it. So one of the things I do in everything that I do is I think about, how could I possibly do this better? Sometimes I don't have an answer, and other times I come up with some great ideas. A way to do this is you can ask yourself 3 questions. What did not go well? Which is, and all you're looking for at the beginning is one thing. And the other important question to ask yourself is, what could I do differently the next time? So it's not just enough to identify something that didn't go well, but what could you do differently the next time? And then the other part is, what did I do well? And I always encourage you to leave with something at the beginning in terms of what you're doing. When people are giving their icebreakers, if I happen to be their evaluators, one of the things that I always talk to them about in the do well category is they actually got up and gave the speech, which, as almost all of us know, is one of the biggest challenges. It requires courage on our part, bravery on our part to get up, speak to that group, and try and communicate a message. So I always let people know that in the beginning. So even if you have a speech that doesn't go well, I want you to remember that at least you tried. And you should always keep that in mind, that the effort you put into it is really good. Now, if you didn't put any effort into it, that's a different story. But if you put an effort to it, you thought about it, you prepared for it, and you tried to do your best, and it didn't go over the way you wanted it to, you still deserve recognition and recognize yourself for having gone out there and really tried to do a better job with it. So set yourself up to win. And that's one of the reasons that I want you to think about it. There's always something positive. And I'm always thinking about somebody's presentation, somebody else's presentation, and what did they do well. And I want them to know that. And also members can learn about it, other members in your club. All right, let's think about some other things in terms of your presentations and what you're doing. This is a picture I took in Paris a few years ago. Of course, the irony to this is that we were supposed to be in Paris this year for the International Convention, but that was a no-go item. I've had the privilege of being in Paris a few times, and on this last trip, which was just a few years ago, I thought, I don't have a really nice picture of Notre Dame, and I'd like to get a good picture of Notre Dame. So I found a position. I thought, I like the position here. And I had the river and I had Notre Dame in the background, but I thought, the foreground here, I've got the water. I could really use something here in the foreground. There are plenty of tour boats going up and down the river. So I thought, let me just wait and I'll take an image. So a traditional way of doing this is waiting for the right content and the right time. And there's nothing wrong with that, but you're going to have to wait. And that can be a challenge. Some of you may be in the situation where you're waiting for the right content, the right time to give your speeches. And I would encourage you to stretch yourselves. If you're always waiting for the right content and the right time, you're going to miss opportunities to stretch your skills, and you're going to miss opportunities to really improve your speaking. If you think about it for table topics is one of those things where we do what? We're not prepared for it. We're not quite ready. So we have to get up and do the best that we can possibly do. So I would encourage you to do that as well. We had a club member when I first joined Toastmasters who was always waiting for the right content and the right time. And it took forever for him in between his speeches. Now, he did a good job, but it was just taking a long time for him to really make progress. So certainly you could do that. There's nothing wrong with it. I didn't have to wait too long for this, so that wasn't too bad. Now, this one I took right here in my home of Tampa. We're out on Tampa Bay. We have quite a few dolphins. And they have excursions where you can go out and they'll try to get the dolphins to ride the wake of the boat. This one I did not take with an ordinary camera. I was taking it with something that had high shutter speed. And as I mentioned to you right at the beginning, I love wildlife and I was taking pictures. This is my favorite out of all the photos that I took. And so you just keep trying until you get it right. So I took a lot of pictures that day, probably 150 to 200 photos that day. And out of those, one was really good. Now I had some others that are pretty good as well, but this is my favorite out of the bunch. So that's part of it. When you're trying to advance your skills, be willing to try. Just like I did with the humor, I just kept working at it and trying at it. Did it feel good while I was going through that process? No, absolutely not. I don't want to fool you on that. It was a little bit painful to give the speech and realize nobody laughed. I was trying to make it funny, but eventually I got there. So I would encourage all of you to do this. Now, I had some experience using a high shutter speed, so I increased my chances of doing what? Capturing this image. This one I took, by the way, with just a point and shoot camera. Sometimes we don't think through things, and it takes other people to mention things to us or prompt us. As you know, I mentioned I took photography since my teenage years. When I'd go on a trip, I'd take pictures to remember the trip. And then I also have written articles. But up until I started contributing to our local publication here, so just about 5 years ago, I never thought to do the photography and the writing together. And here it is where I was doing one of the early pieces. I do the travel pieces for a publication, and this was locally. This was at a Tampa Zoo. And we have a cloud leopard, and the cloud leopard was looking, and I took this image. I really liked this image. It was staring right at me. This is what it looked like in our publication. When it came out, I got lots of comments and compliments about this image in the piece, and everybody was talking about it and mentioning it, and they really were engaged with it. So I got lots of positive feedback. A few weeks later, at our photo club, and I am a member of our photo club, I came across this image. Now, I did not take this picture. This is a photographer. Her name is Jackie Hansen. And Jackie's images I'd always liked. And then I came across this particular image. And the first thing I thought was, wow, same subject matter, much better image than what I took. Now, I still like my image, but I recognized that this was a better image than what I had taken. And our initial reaction many times when we hear a better speaker or we see a better speaker is to be insecure or to be jealous. So it doesn't matter what we're doing in life. If somebody's doing it better than we are, insecurity and jealousy, and sometimes the actions and behaviors that go with it, are likely things that people will do. And I'd like all of you, if you feel that, I'd like you to step away from that and just say, what can I learn from others? Well, I was making a comment about Jackie's picture at our planning meeting for our local publication. And one of the other people in our group, Paula, said, oh, do you really like Jackie's work? I said, yes. And Paula said to me, would you like to meet her? I said, do you know her? She said, yeah, I know her very well. I said, well, that would be great. It turns out Jackie lives 10 doors away from me. She's just down the road. And so Paula connected the two of us. Jackie and Jackie's husband, John, and I, we hit it off right away. And we became fast friends. And the way I describe it is I can take very good pictures to great pictures. Jackie takes great pictures to fantastic pictures. I've had the opportunity in the last few years to go out and do photography with Jackie and John. John on occasion does photography, but Jackie is the primary photographer. Here's what I want you to think about. When you are hanging out with people who are better than you are, and by the way, in your Toastmaster club, when you see somebody who's a great presenter in your club, pay really close attention. Observe what she or he is doing. Make some notes. Ooh, I really like that. Oh, wow. When she did that, the audience really responded well to her. When he said that, the audience really liked his message. So really start paying attention to what other people are doing. And in Toastmasters, we have a tendency to be really helpful to each other, most Toastmasters, and you may have an opportunity to talk to that person and find out. In my case, when I go out on and do photography with Jackie, we have a chance to talk about the photography and what each of us is doing. And that can be incredibly valuable. So the great thing is in Toastmasters, it's relatively easy to get feedback. Outside of Toastmasters, you may have to ask some questions from other people to get more insight. And if you ask people and say, hey, I really liked what you did, I'd like to get a little bit more insight. Could you tell me a little bit more about your thinking behind this? I will let you know that some people don't want to be helpful. That's okay. Doesn't stop me from asking the question. Other people, when I ask them, they're not very good at explaining what their thinking was behind it, or sometimes they don't know. But every once in a while, you'll strike gold, or you'll find a diamond, somebody who can give you a really great explanation, and they'll say, oh, it's really easy. Here's what you do. And that can be incredibly valuable. So I encourage all of you to think about that for whatever it is you want to be better at, whether it's in your work or something in your life. When I teach productivity sessions, one of the things that I'll say to people is, it doesn't matter how well I'm doing something, somewhere out there is somebody who's figured out an even better way to do it, and I just haven't met her or him yet. So that's how I always like to think about it. It's, yep, this is a great way to do it. It's a really efficient way to do it. It's a really effective way to do it. It's a really powerful way to do it. I just haven't met the person who can really show me how to make it even better. So one of the things that I did with Jackie and John, we went about a 2-hour drive farther south from where we live. And this is actually an owl. It's called a burrowing owl. They're not that common. They're only in a few places in North America. But this owl, unlike other owls, builds their nest in the ground. They're called burrowing owls. And as we went out to shoot it, you can't get that close to them. And I was shooting at the maximum range of my lens at the time. I have a bigger lens, a better lens now. But at that time, I was really stretched on what my camera could do, because there's some distance involved. They're very small birds, but I still went out and tried to do it. Jackie had much better pictures because she had a better, she's got a better camera, number one, but number two, she had a bigger lens on her camera, so it was easier for her to do. But I didn't let that stop me from trying to do what? Captured the image. So this was one of the better ones that I had. And you can see the owl here, and you can see the baby in the bottom. So I did get a halfway decent image, an interesting image, but in the ground. This was one of the other ones. The burrowing owls are quite interesting because they'll not only build their burrows, but they'll build them right beside the road if that's where they want to build the burrow. They don't really care too much. Now, we do have signs posted so people, pardon me, pay attention and don't run over them, or at least slow down. But I couldn't believe how close this was to the road. I was grateful for the opportunity to try and photograph these very interesting birds. And out of it, I got 2 or 3 images that I really liked. So whatever it is you're doing, when you get up to speak, be grateful for the opportunity to do what? Get up and practice. If you're in your club and you don't have a role as a speaker, an evaluator, or one of the other main roles, you're not the table topics master or the Toastmaster, and you don't get up to do table topics or volunteer for table topics, you've just missed an opportunity. And I would encourage all of you to always take the opportunity to speak in some capacity, especially for those of you who are new. And be grateful for the opportunity to do what? Practice the skill. This year, I went back down for the burrowing owls, and I was just by myself. I had the bigger lens camera, and I managed to capture this one with a mouse that I had caught. A little bit different. So I had better equipment, I had better focus as a result, and I had an opportunity to capture this particular image. And then they are owls, and yes, they do have the ability to fly, but I captured one that flew up into a tree. And so I took this picture, and one of the things I would encourage you to do is think about what's a little bit different. And this is important. It doesn't have to be hugely different. It just has to be a little bit different, and it will be outstanding. So in this case, I got the burrowing owl. I got it up in the tree. When I came back, I was sharing the image with Jackie, and she said, I've never seen them in the tree. She'd always seen them in the ground. So if you're paying attention to what's a little bit different and you're trying to capture it, then you can certainly take advantage of this. So this was an image that I really liked. Got some nice lighting. It's a little bit different than you'd expect to see a burrowing owl, quite different than you'd normally expect. By the way, I didn't have a lot of time. The bird was only in this position for about 1 minute. So sometimes when an opportunity shows up, we've got to act quickly. The more practice, the more experience we get, the easier it is for us to do what? Recognize an opportunity, take advantage of it, and hopefully capture it. Now, this aspect of doing something that's a little bit different, I was doing some research on Walt Disney, and some of you may know that Walt Disney World is located here in Florida. So Disneyland is in California, but Disney World, which is significantly bigger, is here in Florida. And I was doing some research on Walt Disney World, and this is an image from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And Disney liked a lot of creativity, but one of the things people noted him for, he could always think of the extra to put into something that was being produced. They were making 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and this is the scene in the movie where the giant squid attacks the submarine, the Nautilus. They had already filmed it. Walt Disney was looking at the footage for it, and he said, something's missing from this, and he ordered them to reshoot it. And they said, that's going to cost a lot of money. He said, no, I just feel it's the right thing to do, and we need to reshoot it. So they did, at a cost of $250,000, which would be several $1 million in today's money. And here's the extra that he added. If you've seen the movie, you may recall the giant squid attacks the submarine. They go to the surface, and there's this thunderstorm going on. So they're fighting this squid in the midst of this raging storm going on. That's the extra that Disney put into it. In the original film footage, there was no storm going on. There simply was the fight scene with the squid. And for those of you who've seen it or can recall it, it is a fantastic scene in the movie. So I want you to think about that little extra that you can add to your presentations or to your work that can make it stand out. And here's the really cool part about it. If you just added a really great opening to your presentation, and the rest of your presentation is what you normally do, chances are very high that your presentation will stand out. Or if you add a moment of humor on a really dry subject matter, your presentation will stand out. Now, that's really important for those of you giving presentations at work. If you can think of a humorous moment during the research as you're trying to put things together, or that somebody said, then and you add that into your presentation, which most people wouldn't think of, your presentation is going to stand out. It really doesn't take a whole lot. We had one presenter in our club, and I'll never forget him. He was very, very soft-spoken. You could barely hear him. But he got everybody to listen because he had a very dry sense of humor. And the first time he would say something that was funny, half the club went, "What did he just say?" Because they really weren't paying attention. But after that, you could hear a pin drop because everybody was listening for that next moment of humor. So he had one thing that he did, and he did well. And about every 2 minutes or so, he would say something that would bring a smile to your face, or it was a laugh. So think about that extra that you can bring to what you are doing. I talked about this a little bit earlier, but can I revisit or deliver again? If you get an opportunity to do something again, I encourage you to do it. In this case, some of you may recognize it. This is Angkor Wat in Cambodia. I had been a number of years ago. This is rather famous, or has been since they made the movie Tomb Raider, Lara Croft. This is one of those famous places. In fact, it's called Ta Prohm, but they now refer to it as Tomb Raider Temple. When I was there a number of years ago, it was so busy and so crowded, I could not get a clean shot of the tree and the temple. When I was there this year, the virus was already having an impact, and a lot of the Chinese tourists were not in Cambodia. They'd already stopped the flights, they'd stopped the flow. And I recognized after the first two temples, I had two family members with me, that we were having nowhere near the number of visitors that I had experienced before. I turned to our tour guide, who was the same one I'd had a few years before. I hired him again. And I said, "Look, there's hardly anybody here. Can we go to," and he finished my sentence and said, "Tomb Raider." I said, "Yes, I'd really like to get them there." And so I was able to get this very, very nice picture of a rather famous temple. So the challenge is when you're doing this, a lot of people will go up, they stand right in front of it, they do the selfie, but here I was able to do it. So if you get an opportunity to do something again, do it better, then by all means, take it again. Also, when we were at another temple, one of the things is that the monks here really make this picture pop. At an interesting viewpoint, the temples in and of themselves are really quite interesting, but the opportunity to capture something new was really great. The monks don't like to have their picture taken, so I had to work really quickly. I saw them coming through and I thought, if I work this really quickly, I should be able to capture an image, and I did. And so I was able to get something that I normally wouldn't get. I encourage all of you, you're going to get opportunities at work, you're going to get opportunities outside of work, and really just take an opportunity to embrace it. Great, here's an opportunity, let me try and do this in a better way. I can tell you a few years ago that I would have missed this opportunity. I would have been too slow to recognize the opportunity and too slow to capture the image. Now, I know for many of you, this is not going to be that interesting, but here in North America, we certainly don't have people riding bikes like this. We have all kinds of laws and safety laws in place. And so I took this image, all the people who were on their motorcycles, and I got this one. This in and of itself could be a subject matter, and I'm just including it to point out that this needs to be what? A separate presentation. So sometimes you've got to recognize, yep, that's interesting, but I need to leave that out. And that sometimes is the hardest thing that we need to do. And so that'll be for another presentation at another point. One of the things that Jackie encouraged me to do was to enter into a photo competition. Now we have photo competitions at the club level and we have them at the state level. So Jackie said you really should enter and you should do some prints. And so what I did was I did enter some photos, and I had great success. I had 4 images, and I had one that placed first. I had one that got a red ribbon, and then I had one that got a yellow ribbon. So those were the 3 images. At the end of the year, they have a best of the best competition. And we fully expected that this image, which had gotten a blue ribbon, would do well. And it just so happened Jackie, John, and I went out to the final presentation, the final judging for this. And they were down to 4 images, and 2 of my images were in those 4. So we knew I was going to win something for sure. We just didn't know what it was. The other image I had in the final 4 was this image of the butterfly. So if you may recall, that image in the initial competition had received a yellow ribbon. But when they do the best of the best for the year, there's no indication what the scores are. There's no indication what ribbons the images received. And there are a different set of judges. Well, I was pleasantly surprised when I did win first place for best of the year, but the image that I thought was going to win didn't. So it didn't even get a ribbon. It placed 4th. So I did really well in the competition. One of the things that I would encourage you to do when you enter a competition of any kind, you have to think differently about it. So when you think about images for competitions, that's a little bit different than images for publications or images that I might use for something else. And that's true for the things that we do as well. So a presentation in your club may be different than your presentation at work. Something you do at work may be a little bit different than you do in your outside life. But there are some things that you can carry over. So the one that I gave you about thinking of something extra to do. Could you think of something extra to do at work that wouldn't take a lot of time, but would make whatever it is you're doing, your work product, your outcome, better? And almost all of us can. What if you were throwing a party? Could you think of a little something extra that would make that party stand out? So there are some universal things that we can do that we pick up in Toastmasters that we can apply to our other experiences in life. Now, remember where I started. I started by doing what? Like everybody else, taking the feedback, but taking it seriously and thinking about what could I do to become better? That's great feedback. How do I do it? And how do I make it work? So I would encourage all of you to do that. And that's what I always try to think about for pretty much everything that I do in my life, to be more productive, to be more effective. And it only comes down to a few questions. What didn't go so well? How could I do that differently or better next time? And what did go well? So the one thing I'd like all of you to think about, what challenge should I undertake? One of the challenges I undertook recently was to try and photograph hummingbirds. And hummingbirds are only indigenous to the Americas, so North America and South America. If you've ever had a chance to see them, their wings move so fast and they move so fast that trying to capture an image is really, really challenging. And in this case, I felt like a beginner because you're taking a lot of pictures and a lot of pictures don't turn out. But I did manage to capture a good image. So that's what you need to try when you're doing it. So the last thing I'd like you to think about is what's next for you. What challenge would you like to undertake in your life? What feedback would you like to work on from Toastmasters? And the other thing that I recommend for you is just pick one thing. When I worked on becoming more humorous, that's all I was working on, was that one thing. Now I was still trying to maintain the other skills that I developed, but I really was just working on developing that one new skill. If you try to do more than one, we're usually nowhere near as successful as we're just focused on the one. And with that, Mr. Moderator, I would like to open it up for questions and answers.
Thank you. Thank you very much, DTM Kai. We'll now start with the questions. Fortunately, I do not have any question in the chat box, but I do have questions which were asked before this meeting. So the first question is from Toastmaster Akhilesh. He asks, can we do multitasking for more productivity? How good or bad is multitasking?
Well, I'm going to go with what the research has shown us. Unfortunately, when multitasking first came out, there was some research done that showed multitasking really doesn't work well for us. So there is one area in which we can do multitasking successfully. We're usually better off to take one focus and be focused on that. And we actually, for most of us, we will hit our primary focus after about 20 minutes of concentration. So we're working on something, we've got 20 minutes, we really get into gear. And interruptions help diminish our productivity right away. It just goes back to zero and we have to rebuild. And the challenge is we get a lot of interruptions. So that's the challenge that we have for it. There's one area which we found multitasking, the researchers found multitasking does work if we're doing two tasks that are unrelated. So if we are, for example, if somebody happens to be walking on a treadmill and they're reading at the same time they're on a treadmill, or watching TV, as some people will do when they're working out, people can do that successfully. You're better off to do things, a lot of people do this at home, where they'll start one task and that task can run by itself. For example, if you've got laundry that you're doing, you've got a washing machine and you throw it in the washer and you let the washer go, and then you go on to something else. So you can do multiple tasks as long as you're organized and you're fitting those in between. That works quite well. But unfortunately, the studies have shown the vast majority of us are not good at doing two things at once. I don't know what it's like for you in India, but here in North America, people are not allowed to text and drive because they two different tasks. People can't do that well. And in a lot of places, you're not allowed to be actually even talking on your phone and driving. So there have been far too many accidents, and those two are unrelated tasks, but concentration is needed for driving. So we'd like to think we're good at it. Unfortunately, the research has shown we're not.
Thank you, Kai. I believe there is a rule in India where you are not allowed to talk on mobile phones while driving, but none of us follow that, and we feel very proud by doing that. Now, our next question is from District Director Nitesh. He asks, how can kids be trained at an early age in getting organized and follow good productivity habits? So Nitesh is a young parent, I would say.
Yes, that's a great question. I can offer one or two suggestions. One is when it's time for the kids to go to bed, is to get them in the habit of tidying up. So you just let them know, 20 minutes till we're going to start getting ready for bed. And then at the 20-minute mark, all right, we're going to take some time to pack things away. And so if they get in the habit of doing that, they'll know what, when playtime is done, then what we do at the end is we pack it away and we organize it. And part of it is if we ourselves lead by example. So the neater we have things, the better off it is for us to do that. It is possible for you to be organized in one area of your life and not be organized in another area of your life. So I would encourage you to think about, where am I already organized and doing that well? What's another area that I can bring that together? Now, a really simple one, I love this one at home. When you're about to move from one room to another, is to think about, is there anything I need to carry out of this room to the other room? And if you see it, to take it and move it. So when we're in the habit of doing it, it makes it a lot easier. But for little kids, just to get them in the habit of doing that. And so those would be a few suggestions with that particular question.
Thank you, and thank you, Kai. I can totally relate to it, and I think it resonates with me what you have said, that if you are, you cannot be, it cannot be a scenario where you're organized in one sector and not organized in the other. You have to be organized throughout your life. Now, the next, I think we are running short of time, so we'll have two more questions now. First question is from a member, Srinu Babu, and he asked how to plan in advance and execute with focus. How do we plan in advance?
The shortest advice I can give for this one is to think of what are the steps involved, and then what's the time that we have allocated for this, and then to follow that. So to do it step by step. So let's just take something really simple that most of us will be familiar with. If I were to do my next speech in my Toastmasters club, so a manual speech, I'd have to look at what are the objectives for that speech, then think about the subject matter. Then a lot of people write their Toastmaster speeches, which is fine. Some of you may just rough it out. But what's the content? How am I going to organize that, put that together? And then a lot of us will do what? Take an opportunity to practice it at a minimum, to see if the timing works, to see if what we're trying to communicate actually works. So you lay that out, you figure out how long that's going to take, and then to put it together. So one of the ways you could do this is you could set this up for week 1. I'm going to review the objectives and put some initial ideas down. Week 2, I'm going to write my speech. Week 3, I'm going to finish writing that speech and practice it. And then week 4, I'm going to deliver the speech. So that would be a way that you could lay that out. And then, and one of the things that I would encourage all of you to do is, for example, with speeches, we often get ideas for speeches and we fail to make a note of what that idea is. And maybe it's just a rough idea. It's not ready to give. It's not 5 to 7 minute speech. However, if you made a note of that speech idea and the few things that come to mind, then that would be invaluable for when it comes time to preparing a next speech. You could review that list of speech ideas that you have and what you developed, and you're already underway and saying, well, here's the speech idea that I have, and I actually thought of one example for it. So I only need 2 more examples to make this work.
Thank you, Kai. So although I'm getting messages that the time is up, but we'll have just one more question because it's related to productivity. How to keep tap on productivity when situation is adverse and completely out of control? The question is asked by a Toastmaster Yashpal Singh.
I missed the first part of the question.
How to keep a tap on productivity when situation is adverse and completely out of control?
That is a fantastic question. That is definitely very challenging. There are a couple approaches that you can take to this. One of them is, especially when things are chaotic, they're out of control, or we feel overwhelmed, and we're looking at where do I go. I encourage everyone to figure out what's one thing I can get done today, or what's one thing I can get done this morning. or what's one thing I can get done in the next hour, and pick that idea and work on that. And then at the very least, you're making some progress. Of course, the bigger the project is, it may be one baby step on a particular project. So that is one of the things that you can do. One of my favorite techniques to use is this one. I like to use index cards or Post-it notes. Those are two of my favorite devices to use, but I've also just simply taken a sheet of paper, folded it in half or folded it into quarters. And when we have a lot to do, when we're feeling overwhelmed or there's a lot of chaos, I will take that index card or Post-it note. And by the way, if you're doing a lot of work in computers, I love the Post-it note because I can put the Post-it note on the corner of my computer, and I will put that one main thing that I need to get done that day. And so here's what happens when you do that. You get interrupted. Somebody's got a crisis. They need your expertise. They need your help. And so you have to step away and help them. And you do that. And at that point, we've forgotten what it was we were trying to get done. But if you have that Post-it note on your computer, or you've got that index card on top of everything else that you're doing, you come back, you look at it, and you say, oh yeah, that's the number one thing I'm trying to get done this morning. So let me get back to that. And that is one of my favorite things to do. Now, the other technique that I like to use is, let's suppose we have a day and it got completely out of our control, and that can happen. And I don't care how senior you are in a company. I don't care how much experience you have. When we have other demands from us, from other people, then we can very easily end up having a day that's out of our control. And what I like to do is, at the end of the day, and by the way, a day like that feels very frustrating. It's the end of the day. We feel tired, and we also feel frustrated because it feels like we didn't get anything done. Now, that may not be the case, but it feels like that because we didn't get anything done on what we know is an important project for us. And what I like to do at that point is, before I call it quits for the day, is I look at that number one focus and I say, what's one thing I could get done on that today before I call it quits? Now, sometimes that's as simple as you make a phone call to put in a request for something, or you send an email to get your request in, or maybe you take that email and there's something you need to do to advance an important project forward. So somebody sent you something, you need to review it, give approval or give your okay. And so what I'll do is I'll take a few moments to recharge because I'm feeling tired. I'll come back, I'll look at that, and I'll say, great, what do I need to do to go over this, and then send it off and send it back to the other person or give my approval. And so those are a few techniques that I'll use to try and at least get some productivity out of that day.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Toastmaster Kai, for answering that question for us. Although we had many more questions, but the time, I believe, will not allow us. I apologize for others who have asked questions, and I cannot put these questions up to Kai. Today, I've learned how you can learn from Toastmasters and apply it in your personal and professional life. The example that you provided, DTM Kai, were nothing short of fascinating. At first, I was confused, I must admit, that why are you talking about Toastmasters? Because this event is called Beyond Toastmasters, and I want to hear everything that you do apart from Toastmasters. But the examples that you gave, the analogy that you set, and the way you presented, I think these lessons will be embedded in my memory for a long time to come. Thank you very much again. And now I would hand the stage to someone who is a testing professional working with Amdocs from last 4 years. He has been a Toastmaster since 4 years now and have served district in various capacities such as area director, division director, and now he's serving as club road director of District 98. He enjoys cooking, writing diary, and is a passionate gamer. Please help me welcome, for the vote of thanks, the Club Road Director 2 of District 98, Amandeep Singh, DTM.
Thank you very much, Aviral. Is there some echo from my side or everything is good? Can anyone confirm?
Good, Aman. We can hear you.
Good. I was asking so because it's raining cats and dogs here and my flat is completely dark. So I was not even able to join sometime before because of the network connectivity. But any which ways, first of all, I want to thank Kai. Thank you, Kai, for having such a great session from your side. And indeed, it was very much learning and a lot of experience which you shared will be very handy and will be very fruitful for us in the near future whenever we have any such situation like that in our life. So thank you very much for sharing your experience and giving insights about your life. I also want to thank all the team members who were involved in organizing this episode. It's indeed a very big task to organize any of the event. And nowadays, looking at the current scenario, when we hardly get time to even focus on our personal life, taking spare time out of our work, professional commitments, and the other commitments, having such a great commitment from all of you is indeed a very heartening thing to see. I would like to thank few people who were involved in the planning and execution of this episode 3 of Beyond Toastmasters. First of all, design and public relations team, Cyril Thomas and Alpha Mary. Also the content manager, Megha Shrikar, and our Zoom masters and timers, Kiran Nair, Afshan Khan, Swapnil Patel, and Shivani Bachchan. Thank you very much, everyone, for putting up such a great show so that we as a member, everyone across the globe can attend this awesome session delivered by Kai. Again, Kai, thank you very much. And I thank all of the audience, all the District 98 officer, as well as other district officers and international officers who attended this session. With this, I would like to hand it over to Area Director Joydeep.
Thank you, Amandeep. At the end of the session, finally, we have come to another end of an enlightening episode of Beyond Toastmasters. Hope we all now have and work more productively. With that, I declare the session has ended. But please don't go away anywhere. After such a beautiful session by DTM Kai Rambow, I request all the attendees to please switch on their videos and post a beautiful smile so we all can have a group snapshot.
Are you all ready? I'm taking the first pick. Done.
Thank you, Toastmasters Officer. And thank you, each one of you, for attending this session. A beautiful learning coming all the way from DTM Kai Rambow. Thank you.
Thank you, Kai.